Hi, everybody. It's Donna from Purple Pinky Promises. I have this vintage masculine card I'm bringing to you today. And right now I'm showing you all the layers that we're going to be using. I will have measurements posted down below. I'm not going to be able to go as fast as this video, but there's some ephemera, some Nature Lover ephemera from Prima Marketing, and let's see, what do we have next coming up? We've got the Stampers Anonymous Tim Holtz collection, the Professor 2 and the Flower Shop stamp set. We're also using some Tim Holtz idea-ology-Layers. And we've got Catherine Pooler Designs, the notable and quotable stamps that we'll be using in Spellbinders. Dies, we're going to use a tag that comes from the Assorted tag dies, and not quite, and that's the honeybee. I showed you the honeybee salvaged brick stencil. We'll be using that as well later. Okay, we're going to get right in here to doing some stamping. And this paper that I'm using to stamp on is some really cool paper. It's a gray. It's got a gray tone to it, and it kind of has a little bit of some flecks in it. It's a really cool paper. It is the Neenah Moonrock Smooth Environmental Paper. So everything is being, all the stamping and everything is being done with this paper. All right, so we're inking up the Professor here, and I decide that I want a little bit more, I want a darker image, so I give that a second round of some Versafine Clair ink in Nocturne. And next up, I'm going to be, all of these elements are going to end up being used as ephemera, which sometimes we forget that our images can be fussy cut and used to create those fun little elements that we sometimes get in our ephemera packs. So that's what all of these pieces that I'm working up right now are for. Now I'm giving you a little demo of my favorite stamp cleaner, which is from Altenew, and it's fabulous. You can see how well that cleaned up with it. Okay, some more stamps from the Professor 2. And I'm going to ink this up first with some Distress Vintage Photo. And you'll see that I end up doing this little technique that I really ended up liking because it kind of gave it a two-tone look. So giving that a second stamp. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to use some more of that Versafine Clair Nocturne. But I'm going to give it a second generation. And so I'm going to stamp off so it's a little lighter on that black. And then I'm going to give it a second generation, and it kind of gives it that brownish black tone. Okay, so I stamped that twice. And this one comes from the Flower Shop, the Stampers Anonymous Tim Holtz collection, this stamp does. And I'm inking it up with some some Vintage Photo. And I intended to use the same process that I used with those two little ticket pieces there, those dated ticket, I don't know what you would call them. They're just, it's a date. I intended to do the same thing, but I forgot to stamp off. I forgot to make it a second generation when I inked it up with the, with my ink, my darker black ink, my Versafine Clair. So, boo. And I had to think for just a minute on what to do. So I decided, you know what? I'm just going to give that another round with, yeah, I'm showing you how I had intended to actually stamp that off. So what I'm doing here is I'm inking it back up with my Vintage Photo. And I actually was pleased with that. It was fine. It actually gave it a little bit of a different look, and I was, it made me happy. And so Whew, that was a happy mistake. No mistakes in crafting, only happenstance. So here I am showing you the final results, and I am going to end up fussy cutting all of these pieces. And I'm not going to bore you with my fussy cutting, but if you're new to fussy cutting, you move your paper, not your scissors. So that's my little tip for fussy cutting. So we're jumping ahead. Okay, now these pieces actually they layer and they measure 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 for the largest, and I'm working on the smallest one here, which is 4 by 5 1/4. So I'm inking this background piece up from the Professor 2 with some vintage photo. And I'm just trying to create this fun little vintage background. And I just am willy-nilly. I kind of fly by the seat of my pants when I'm trying to decide what to do for backgrounds and such and inking. I really don't get bent out of shape too much. Especially with stuff like this, because there's going to be a lot of layers. And of course, this is a second generation because I don't want it so bright. I do want it light so that I can actually, you'll see I'm going to stamp back over it again. And I'm just going for that vintage background that has lots of layers and different elements to it. So you can watch this process unfold. This is also done in a second generation. And voila, there it is. So I decide I'm going to go ahead and use this background. Now, if you had a different background, you could use it, but I just thought, well, why not take full advantage of all of the stamps that are in the set here? So I just place that back on there. It kind of gives it a little bit of a different look. And then I decide, hey, I want to stamp that at the top because it felt kind of bland behind that piece, that circular piece, and behind that bottom left corner. So there we have it. Now we're going to ink up. And what I'm going for here is kind of like a vintage patina look. That you'll see the iced spruce that I end up adding to this to kind of give it that old vintage look. And honestly, folks, I don't have any tips for you other than just dive in. And if you get a little bit of a nick of color here and there, actually, that's vintage. So have fun with it, play with it. If you're new to any of this, distressing up your stuff, I say be bold, play. Don't worry about it. Enjoy the process. So I'm going to let you watch me here because I do end up making this even darker at some point in this video. So there it is. This is what I get at this point, but it gets darker later. Now this piece is actually going to go behind that vintage layer. So we really don't need to ink up all of it. And we're just going around the edge because not much of it's really going to show. And actually maybe even what I've got right there might be too much in some places. But I'm just going at it willy-nilly. All right. Now we're going to go back. That was iced spruce, regular distress ink, and now we're going back with some vintage photo, regular distress ink. And this will get even darker as well. No, it won't. I think that's going to stay. I think it's this that gets darker. Yeah, this is really going to get inked up, and I really liked it darker. I thought it definitely needed some more oomph. Okay. And I think I put some more iced spruce on that eventually as well. Okay, setting that aside, we're just going to take all of our layers, and we're going to use that same process with all of our elements that are going to go on this card. So the next thing that I do is I take some VersaMark with some vintage photo embossing glaze. So that VersaMark ink, we're just going to get that on there so that our embossing glaze has something to stick to. And if you can see here, now if that was all going to show, I would not have been happy with that. That, and I'm taking my heat tool to it and melting all of that embossing glaze on there. And I like the embossing glaze because it actually, you can actually see through it. So it's kind of cool. It doesn't give a solid image, but rather a see-through image. And so I wouldn't have been happy with it, but I have so much to layer on this card. I actually end up, working around on my card to make sure that some of that brick actually can show. So you'll see that here in a minute. But yep, there goes that iced spruce. I'm darkening up my card front a little bit, and here we go. We're just gonna distress these elements here. Okay, so once I get these inked up, you'll see that I kind of play around with my elements for quite a bit to figure out exactly where I want things to go. And folks, that right there is proof in the pudding that I don't work too hard at inking things up. I just jab at it. Seeing all that looks very old and vintagey. And I decided not to mess with the bottom half of that because I figured, why bother? Okay, so on this little bit, this element here, which I think I've already mentioned, is from, I think I did mention it already where that was from. This is actually from the Ranger line. I believe it's Ranger. No, it's Tim Holtz Idea-ology-Layers, excuse me. So I ink this up with Vintage Photo, and I discover after I'm playing around with it, and I even try to dry it with my heat element, and I discover that because of its slick surface, it's not very porous, it's not going to absorb that ink. I'm going to need to do something completely different with it. So you're going to see here what I end up doing with it. I actually end up wiping off all that ink. So, yeah. So here I am, fussing with it, playing with it, trying to decide what I want. And this is where I decide I need to have a little bit more of that brick showing through. That's what I'm aiming for at certain points here, is trying to get the brick to show. And so, yeah. I also don't want to cover up my 755. So I'm trying to, I have a lot of decisions to make with where I want to place stuff. But, so to hold things down, I just kind of stick my glue underneath there. And, there's a number of things that you can do to get your pieces to sit if you like it the way it looks. You can use some press and seal. You can use washi tape. Spellbinders has the best craft tape ever. Now, I will warn you that if you're going to use washi tape, be careful if you still have things that are kind of tacky from your ink, it can pull up your paper. This is just a little warning. Otherwise, it's the best craft with, your dry cardstock. It's really the best craft tape ever. Okay, so just fiddling with it some more to try to figure out what I'm doing here. It does take me a hot minute to figure this out. When you are working with a bunch of elements, I think what I'm doing here is I don't want them, those two tickets to be in the same spot. And I just kind of like the way that ended up right there. And peeking through the back of the car. And I think I ended up moving, did I end up moving my car? I don't know, but you'll see now what I end up doing with this car. See, this is when I discovered that ink is rubbing off, and I don't know that it's going to dry. And I think I took a baby wipe. I actually ended up taking a baby wipe to it and cleaning it off. This is funny. Yep, I just cleaned that up with the baby wipe, and it came off. I mean, for the most part, it came off. Some little bit of brown left on it. Not enough coverage. So I'm going to take my VersaMark, and I'm going to just throw some ink on there. And we're going to use some more of that vintage photo embossing glaze. And the cool part about this is that it becomes see-through. Yeah, I'm showing you it's all over. The ink's all over. So I'm just taking off some of that embossing glaze here and there with my fingers. Just kind of flicking at it so that in some spots it'll have it, in some places it won't. Which is a distressing. I'm just kind of distressing it. So, here and there. Okay, now I'm going to heat that up. And I don't show you the whole process of the heat embossing because I don't want to bore you with that either. But we're taking our heat tool to it and we are melting it. I thought I cut that out, but I guess I didn't. Well, now you get the joy of seeing the whole thing. All right, there it is. Isn't that cool? I just love the way that turned out. It was so cool looking. It just added it gave it an extra level of awesomeness. So here I am wanting at least some of my numbers to show and some of the brick to show there on that background. That's kind of how I decided where to place it. And I end up trimming off some of the professor as well. You'll see that here in a minute. So I'm putting some foam tape on there, and the foam tape that I end up using, it's all listed in the description below in the video. So all of the products that I used will be listed. So if you're ever wondering if you click on the link where it takes you to, it actually takes you to our store, our little crafty shop. So that is where it takes you to. We're located here north of Kansas City in a little teeny tiny town. We're a little small town, so we have a little craft shop up here in the north of Kansas City. Okay. There it is. pop him up to give it some added dimension. And now we're headed towards our sentiment, which I'm using the Versafine Clair again. And I ended up using the embossing glaze. I kind of wanted to see what would happen with it. Didn't really do much other than give it an embossed look because, you know, it's see-through. So, and that ink is dark. Now, I will tell you that I did something with this sentiment that I guess I could take it and redo it, but I wished I had done, instead of fussy cutting around this image, I think that if I were to do this again, I would actually cut it out. Like I'd cut out each line, the 3 lines, and then I would cut apart the deer heart and perhaps fit that all on my tag a different way instead of cutting it out like this, because it kind of hangs off the tag. And it doesn't look horrible. It's just, that's how I would do this different if I were to do it. So that's my suggestion. If you replicate this project, maybe cut out each of those, cut out your courage, your deer heart, and then, of course, C.S. Lewis could stay on as, you know, 1 line. So I'm die cutting my tag. This is from Spellbinders. And those are the Assorted tags dies. Those are small. They're cutesy. They're adorable. There are stamps that work really nice with them in the store. Okay. And those stamps are actually on the package. You can see those on the packaging, which stamps work really nice. And I'm fussing with it because I don't know that I'm really happy with it, honestly. And I put this on some dimension and to pop it up. And the next step that I am going to take some twine, the natural twine. All of our twine here is wrapped up on this cute little wooden spool. And it actually, you probably end up, just a little FYI, you probably end up getting more than what is listed because we just, you know, we spoil our people. So this twine is wrapped up on a little wooden spool. When you get it, we package it up, we measure it, wrap it up here. So now I'm putting some twine on here, and I actually add a knot on it to keep it secure. And I inked it up to kind of make it a little darker. And now I'm just unraveling it and fluffing it up and adding some more ink to make it darker. And that's why I like, you know, the plain colored seam binding and twine, because you can use your inks to change it to match your project, the inks that you're using in your project. Okay. And we are coming down to the end of this card here, and I'm just popping some foam up on the edge of that so that it doesn't sag. We don't have sagging here. No sagging coming from this end of this the world. This end of the craft world. Okay. And now we're going to attach that. And I do believe I told you our layers were 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and then our vintage front that I'm using right now is 4 by 5 1/4. And we're attaching it to our card base. And voila! This card is complete. Yay! All right, folks. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for taking the time to watch. I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.